What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another Too Good for Theaters video. Today I'm going to be breaking down some of the higher end tackles in this 2025 NFL draft class here and what the Patriots might be doing with that fourth overall selection if they do choose to go offensive tackle. So let's get right into it. So starting off here with who scouts really consider as the top tackle prospect in this draft class has got to be LSU's Will Campbell. Has kind of very good size for a tackle, being 6'6" in height, 320 pounds. And the scouts can't kind of rave enough how productive Will Campbell was at LSU. And it really kind of just shows how highly the program thought of Will Campbell here. As you see in the picture, he had that number 7 patch, which is quote-unquote the top playmaker at the LSU program. I mean, we're talking about guys like Tyrann Mathieu, Patrick Peterson, Leonard Fournette have been the recipients of those patches in the past. And for an offensive tackle to kind of get that patch really kind of just shows how much faith LSU had in Will Campbell these past couple of seasons. But he was a 3-year starter, performed very well against very good edge competition in that SEC defense, or in those SEC defenses there. And with what Will Campbell is lacking in athleticism, I would say that he more than makes up with in terms of mentality as well as fundamentals. Very good lower body fundamentals, the ability to slide his feet, kind of makes up for his lack of arm length, which of course is the big concern here with Will Campbell. But he is just a smart football player. He plays with that sense of edge. He has that motor. He really probably is the quote-unquote safest tackle prospect out of the 4 I'm going to be talking about here. And that's why I think a lot of teams certainly like him in that area. And as a fail-safe, if that arm length where he isn't able to kind of match up to these NFL edge defenders, you can certainly kick Will Campbell into the inside. And I think he can be a very good NFL caliber level guard here. He has the speed, he has the athleticism in terms of his lower body movement to kind of be one of those agile guards who can kind of come out with those kick out blocks as well as some of those kind of swing blocks, whether you're moving him to the outside on pitches or maybe even in some zone reads here where he's able to get to the second level. His lower body athleticism and just his smarts is really going to help him kind of thrive, whether you put him at tackle or if he's unable to kind of match the arm length and power that some of the edge defenders have. He's certainly going to be capable of moving into that inside position and playing guard here. But just taking a look at some of his graded seasons here, his past grade of the 2024 season at LSU, he had an overall grade of 72.7, a run block grade of 69.7, and a very good pass block grade of 80.6. He allowed 18 pressures, 11 hurries, 5 QB hits, gave up 2 sacks, and had 9 penalties go against him. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the highlighted matchups here against Alabama and Ole Miss. Versus Alabama, he had a 58 overall grade, but he had a very good pass block grade of 79. And going up against some of those Alabama edge defenders, guys like Will Campbell from that second level, that box position, really kind of just shows how steady he was at LSU. And even against Ole Miss, I understand that Prinsley did get hurt in this game, that Ole Miss edge defender, who I'm certainly going to be talking about on this channel because I like him a lot, but he had a very good grade in that game, had a 79 overall grade, and a 93 pass block grade in that game there. So understand that game might be a little bit of a miscue, of course, with Princely going down, but really you got to play who you play against, and Ole Miss still had a very good defense. So it really kind of just shows how Will Campbell played very productive ball. And even in his 2023 campaign, which you can arguably say was his best season, he had an overall grade of 82.8, a very good run block grade of around 85, and a pass block grade of 77.7. And playing with a guy like Jaden Daniels is certainly going to help him translate well, I feel, to playing with a guy like Drake May. Of course, Jaden Daniels and Drake May, both very mobile quarterbacks. So that's certainly something that Will Campbell could be familiar with there. But he only gave up 17 pressures, only 12 hurries, 5 QB hits, and did not give up a sack in the 2023 campaign, and only had 5 penalties thrown against him. So it really kind of just shows the elite production that Will Campbell has had these past 2 seasons here at LSU and why scouts are really loving him. And I think it's really going to be easily identifiable whether or not Will Campbell would be successful as an offensive tackle early on in this league is if he's going to be facing these edge defenders who have maybe a couple inches on him in terms of arm length on the outside and his upper body's getting pushed back every time, is he going to have the core strength and the ability to have really good lower body fundamentals to kind of keep, even if he does have that disadvantage of arm length, is he going to be able to stay in front and not get bullied by these NFL edge defenders? So I think it'll be rather early to tell whether or not Will Campbell is going to be an offensive tackle or an offensive guard. But just due to his versatility and his fundamentals, good coaching, as well as his strength in his lower body, I think he's going to be able to carve himself out a successful role, if not at tackle, then at guard. And I do think that he's probably the safest pick here of these four offensive tackle prospects, just because of his ability to be versatile and potentially switch into the inside there. Moving on to the next tackle prospect here, I wanted to talk about Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas here. Pretty similar archetype to Will Campbell, maybe a little shorter here, registered at 6'4" in terms of height, but pretty similar weight in terms of being 320 pounds. And to me, what stands out about Kelvin Banks here is his athleticism from the tackle position here. And there are times where he absolutely dominates reps in terms of the pass protection game, as well as even in the run block grade or game of just dominating the line of scrimmage. And the ability to get to the second level really impressed me with Kelvin Banks. And it kind of just showed very similar to Will Campbell here. This is against good, high-quality SEC defenders on the edge. And there are times where Kelvin Banks looks absolutely untouchable in terms of pass protection. And the only major red flags that I have with Kelvin Banks is, of course, the arm length, which is very similar to Will Campbell, but also there are times where it's just his tape is just inconsistent. And as many times as he had some dominant reps against some very good edge defenders, there are times where he might lunge a little too far or puts himself in a worse position and relies a little bit too much on his athleticism to win reps in terms of instead of his fundamentals. So I would say if Kelvin Banks receives the good coaching where he's able to replicate the consistent pass protection game that he was able to dominate some of these edge defenders with, I think he has the athleticism and the lower body speed to really be a high quality tackle at some of these levels. And especially with how the NFL offenses, some of these wide zones, and for these tackles to be on the move at times, Kelvin Banks, I think, is really going to be effective with his athleticism and ability to kind of spring out and get blocks into the second level here. So I think Kelvin Banks is certainly going to be one of the most highly viewed tackle prospects in this draft class. And me personally, I would see him more so as that late, maybe anywhere from 8th to 15th draft pick in that selection. And there's going to be teams like the Panthers, the 49ers, who are looking for more tackle talent. And I think that Kelvin Banks, if the Patriots wanted to trade back, I would not mind them taking Kelvin Banks based off some of those draft selections that they would get here. But even taking a look at some of the grades that Kelvin Banks here had at Texas, they're a lot better than how Will Campbell even graded at times. But just the 2024 grade, he had an overall grade of 86.2, a run block grade of 81, and a pass block grade of 89.9. He only allowed 10 pressures, only 7 hurries, 2 QB hits, 1 sack, had 7 penalties go against him. And some of the highlighted matchups that I wanted to talk about was against Georgia. He had an overall grade of 79 and a pass block grade of 82, which against some of those Georgia edge defenders like Trayvon Walker, that's a very good grade. And Texas was able to hold their own in terms of pass protection against them. And especially against Ohio State, he had an overall grade of 75.8, but a very good pass block grade of 86.4, especially going up against guys like Jack Sawyer and everyone along the Ohio State defensive line there. So he really played well in these playoffs too, which kind of shows that Kelvin Banks can kind of be that anchor on the edge from that offensive tackle spot. And very similar to Will Campbell, that one big red flag is just going to be that measurement of his arm length. And what I feel like Will Campbell will be able to compensate for in terms of his arm length for his fundamentals, I think Kelvin Banks will be able to compensate his arm length with his athleticism and his lower body fundamentals if he's able to kind of consistently get that to a place where it needs to be. And honestly, I feel like Kelvin Banks is probably going to have a better chance of being a better left tackle than Will Campbell will be. I just don't think that Kelvin Banks has that kind of fallback option just due to his fundamentals of kind of switching into a guard here that Will Campbell could potentially have. So I do think that Kelvin Banks is probably the better boom or bust pick in this draft class in terms of the offensive tackle talent. And if he's able to kind of hit his potential, I think that he's probably going to be the best gifted left tackle out of anyone in this draft class. So starting off here with my personal favorite prospect of these four that I'm going to be talking about here is Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. Is listed around 6'5" in terms of his height and weighs a little less than Will Campbell as well as Kelvin Banks with being around 310 pounds, but very similar to Kelvin Banks in terms of identifying his athleticism and his speed to get off the line. I saw a lot of the same traits of getting to the second level that Kelvin Banks kind of displayed with Josh Simmons, and especially with that Chip Kelly offense, it really highlighted all the strengths and the quickness that Josh Simmons had at Ohio State of getting into that second level and just the explosive playmakers that Ohio State kind of had all season. Really, it was the perfect fit for Josh Simmons to play at Ohio State and kind of utilize that speed, allowing him to get to the edge on a ton of pitches, a ton of jet motions, stuff like that. And it highlighted everything that Josh Simmons does well from a tackle prospect, especially just getting off to the edge and getting into the second level where he's able to dominate secondary defenders with the speed and the strength that he really displayed. Even taking a look at some of his grades here, in the 2024 season, he only played 6 games. He was injured, of course, in that Oregon game. Had an overall grade of 74.4, a run block grade of 68.7, and a pass block grade of 82. Only gave up 1 pressure, 1 hurry, did not allow a QB hit or a sack, and only had 1 penalty thrown against him. Like I said before, not the best sample size there for Josh Simmons, but he performed very well in the time that he was out there, and he went up against some schools like Michigan State, Iowa, and of course he was taking on Oregon before he went down. Not a huge sample size there, so that probably was his worst graded game of the season thus far, but limited sample size, so you can't really take that into a huge display right there for Josh Simmons' skill set. But moving over to his 2023 campaign, he had an overall grade of 67.5, a run block grade of 65.8, and a pass block grade of 71.9. He allowed 15 pressures, 10 hurries, 4 QB hits, gave up a sack, and allowed 8 penalties. But you can kind of see the progression from year to year, getting more comfortable at Ohio State as well. And I would say really the only big red flags that you would have with Josh Simmons is just the lack of tape at Ohio State. He only played around 18 games there, and the competition that he was facing against San Diego State isn't necessarily going to correspond well to NFL talent there. There's going to be a big time difference there. But of course, the knee injury as well. So I think that this combine is even more vital to a guy like Josh Simmons than guys like Kelvin Banks or Will Campbell, just because he has to show that he's kind of moved past that injury and shown that his body has really responded well to that. So if he's able to kind of translate that and show that he's moved past the injury, I think he's going to be someone who could be a top 20 overall pick in this year's draft. And of course, he's not going to be in that Patriots range of the 4th overall selection, but say if the Patriots wanted to trade back a good number of spaces, maybe they're like 15 through 20, and wanted to receive some draft capital along with that, I would not be upset if they took a guy like Josh Simmons there while trading back and getting a couple, maybe a second rounder or even some third rounders in future drafts there. So I would personally like that. And honestly, that's my favorite take right now. If the Patriots are not allowed to have Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter in that, if they can trade back to that scenario and get a guy like Josh Simmons, I think that would honestly be my most favorable outcome of the first round for this year's NFL draft. So it's going to be interesting to see how Josh Simmons responds in this combine and where he's going to land overall in the first round of this NFL draft. All right, everyone, that's going to wrap up this breakdown of my personal favorite offensive line prospects in this draft class. I'm going to be talking about a couple more offensive linemen later on, doing some more draft prospect videos here. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.